With Far Cry 6 coming out barely over a week ago now, at this point it's time for it to be tested against some of the others of the Far Cry series, and in this video it goes up against the last major entry in the Far Cry series, not including New Dawn obviously, Far Cry 5. Far Cry 5 is a pretty highly debated game among the Far Cry series. A lot of people really like it, while more diehard Far Cry fans weren't really a fan of it. But anyway, if you're unfamiliar with how this series works, basically what I do is take two games from the same series and I compare and score them on 4 different categories: story, gameplay, open world, and presentation. Within each category there are several points which I will leave now on screen, and whichever game I feel does that particular subject better will be awarded a point, and the game with the most points at the end is crowned the winner and title of better game. Keep in mind this video is entirely my opinion, and feel free to let me know which game you think is better and how you would score them in the comments. So without further ado, Far Cry 6 versus Far Cry 5. Starting with the story, we are going to start with who we experience the story through, the protagonist. This is a really easy point. I've probably explained it 1,000 times now, but the deputy from Far Cry 5 can hardly be considered a protagonist. They don't speak, so therefore they have no character traits, personality, growth, or anything a strong main character should. A lot of people actually like the mute protagonist because it makes them feel like they are the main character and that everyone is speaking directly to them, and that's cool. I get that, and I definitely got that feeling myself during Far Cry 5 a lot, but in terms of an actual protagonist, I prefer one who, well, you know, actually exists. Danny from Far Cry 6 definitely isn't a perfect protagonist either. In fact, I wish they did a little more with Danny and gave her a stronger character arc, because I feel like there was a lot of potential there. But regardless, Danny has a really strong presence in Far Cry 6. You understand their personality and motivations, and while it may not be the best written and developed protagonist, and certainly isn't on the level of Jason Brody from Far Cry 3, Danny is still a solid main character to get behind, and certainly a step up from the deputy in my opinion. So the first point is going to Far Cry 6. Next are the antagonists, which is definitely a harder decision. We have Joseph Seed from Far Cry 5 and Anton Castillo from Far Cry 6. If you watched my review for Far Cry 6, you'll know that I actually found Anton Castillo to be a pretty generic villain. I get what they were trying to do with Castillo, a tyrant who wants to make his country stronger and wealthier, but goes to horrifying lengths to do it, like slave labor and illegal human experiments and drafting the poor to work for him. In that sense, he's a lot like Pagan Min, since Pagan sold a lot of drugs and killed lots of innocent people to try and bring Kyrat into a new age and make it thrive once again. However, Castillo doesn't have much more to him than that. There was nothing about Castillo that really made me understand or relate to him. I think the best Far Cry villains, or antagonists if you would, are ones that you can relate to in some way or understand, which is a big reason why Joseph Seed from Far Cry 5 is such a good antagonist. Far Cry 5 makes you slowly realize that maybe Joseph Seed is actually the good guy of this story. He wants to do God's work and carry out God's plan, and he wants to fix the world. Joseph is aware of all the flaws of the modern world. People care too much about what others think. They care more about social media than the real people and family around them. People are selfish and cruel, and Joseph wants to correct that and make the world a better place. His intentions are very noble and understandable. It's just the way he does things that may sometimes contradict what he wishes for, trying to end violence by creating more of it. But then again, what is the deputy doing? The deputy is just creating chaos and killing everyone who gets in his way, and Far Cry 5, especially with the ending, really makes you wonder, wait a minute, maybe I was the villain of this story. And part of the beauty of it is that there is no hero and no villain. There is no good or bad, and Far Cry 5 allows you to decide and theorize for yourself who the real villain is, and Joseph Seed only becomes better from New Dawn. Castillo didn't have those layers like Joseph Seed. There wasn't really a time where I felt I could side with Castillo. And don't get me wrong, Giancarlo Esposito did great. It's not like the problem was his performance at all. It's more the way they wrote Castillo. I think Castillo's lack of screen time is also a big reason why he felt so generic, because we just straight up didn't get to learn enough about him. We weren't really given the chance to fully understand him. I think they were really onto something when they explained how Castillo's father was also a dictator who was killed by the legends of 1967, and how Castillo from a young age age just like his son Diego had to endure and suffer. That sounded like a really cool backstory, and I wish they went into it even further. Diego is certainly a redeeming quality of Anton. However, I think Diego represents the good parts of Anton and is pretty much Anton's own reflection of himself when he was a young kid. And not to spoil the ending or anything, but I was really expecting some big payoff by the end, and it was just sorta underwhelming. I wouldn't say the ending was bad, but it was just kinda bland. I expected more from it, and I was really disappointed because I truthfully expected much more from Anton Castillo, especially when they get someone famous for playing villains like Esposito, but he just didn't have the depth or relatability that other villains in the series excel at, like Joseph Seed, so this point is gonna go to Far Cry 5. The side antagonists, or side villains, is another really easy point. The side villains in Far Cry 6 were very bland in my opinion. The Seed family definitely set the bar really high for what I now expect from side villains from the Far Cry series. Each Seed family member had crazy and intimidating personalities, each had different goals and agendas, and they each had their own ways of fighting the deputy. They all felt like main villains in their own right, and they felt like these huge hurdles you had to clear to even get to the biggest hurdle of them all, Joseph. Faith and Jacob are definitely my favorite, and I love how the fight against them is more psychological than anything. They make you realize that you're not the hero you consider yourself to be. You're a killer who enjoys killing people, and Faith especially tries her best to persuade you that her and Joseph aren't bad people and they want to help people. She's so convincing, in fact, that it made me wish it gave me the option to join them. It's even better to know what happens to the deputy in Far Cry New Dawn and how the deputy atones for what he's done. But Far Cry 5 truly has some of the most compelling side villains I've ever played in a video game, and Far Cry 6's side villains don't even compete. In Far Cry 6, the side villains just feel like little obstacles you need to hurry and kill to move on to the big boss Castillo, and while some of them may have some vaguely interesting personalities, not a single one of them made me question my morals or make me think for a second that these people aren't actually bad. Most of them are either crazy or greedy, and they just felt so basic and generic. There was no complexity, no depth to the side villains, and they are very forgettable, unlike the Seed family, which felt like these massive threats that couldn't easily be taken down. So an easy point for Far Cry 5. Plot, once again, is also gonna go to Far Cry 5. I really like how Far Cry 5 focuses on religion and the psychology behind villains like Joseph or even the deputy. I love how everything just falls under that moral gray area and how the game challenges your own beliefs and makes you feel like the villain. I think Far Cry 4 and 3 did this really well too, but Far Cry 5 really shows you the consequences and punishment for your actions, which is why the game ends the way it does. Far Cry 6 does put a big majority of its focus into the whole resistance versus tyrant angle. It was alright. It felt a little redundant, especially since that was a main part of Far Cry 4's plot as well, and there were a lot of cliches and predictable moments in Far Cry 6. It was still solid, but I'd definitely take the plot for Far Cry 5 over 6. Pacing is a different story, however, because pacing is probably one of Far Cry 5's biggest issues. There's multiple times in the game where they forcibly remove you from the open world and bring you into a cutscene with the villain. I'm also not the biggest fan of the progress tracker, like do X amount of things to reach the final confrontation and kill the bad guy. It kills the immersion for me and it makes it feel more like a checklist rather than a strong cohesive narrative. Far Cry 6 I feel is a little drawn out in some areas too, and it is a little boring when the side villains are as weak as they are. You kind of just want to get to killing them already, but generally speaking, it was much more consistent with its pacing and it never forced you to do anything you didn't choose to, like Far Cry 5, so pacing is going to Far Cry 6. Gunplay never really changes too much from game to game in Far Cry, but there's actually quite a lot of new changes and additions to Far Cry 6. The ammo types are a pretty big one. There's soft, armor piercing, incendiary, poison, and standard rounds you can choose between on your guns, which not only forces you to be more strategic and identify which kind of enemies are around you before you start shooting, but it also just introduces another element to the gunplay to keep it more engaging and complex. Far Cry 5 doesn't have bad gunplay by any means, but it can get very tired and redundant after a while, and it doesn't have anything special or unique about it to spice things up, like the ammo types or New Dawn's special abilities. Far Cry 6's gunplay is still not perfect. I don't like the health bars, and some guns felt significantly weaker when compared to Far Cry 5. Bows and snipers, for one, would pretty much always one-shot to the chest in Far Cry 5, while in Far Cry 6 it takes 2 or even sometimes 3 body shots to kill an enemy, which is really frustrating. I'd say the time to kill in general in Far Cry 6 is longer than Far Cry 5's, but that's also partially simply due to the fact that there's a lot more enemy types with different armor and bullet types required to kill faster. Regardless, I think Far Cry 6 had a lot of new additions and changes that spice up the gunplay a bit and make it a lot more engaging, while Far Cry 5's is more on the basic side, so gunplay is going to go to Far Cry 6. Stealth is in a similar situation. Far Cry 6 just added a lot of small additions that make stealth flow better and generally more fun. Gadgets like the perception grenade were a great addition in my opinion. It's a grenade that marks all enemies in the vicinity when you throw it, and it makes maneuvering and stealth smoother. The machete takedowns also look incredible. They're really brutal and satisfying. Not that the takedowns look bad by any means in Far Cry 5, but they lack that flair that Far Cry 6's takedowns have, and people have really wanted the machete takedowns to return in Far Cry 6, and Ubisoft definitely delivered on that. Far Cry 6 also added new things like cameras and security systems, which don't make a huge difference in stealth, but still some nicely added depth. Stealth just overall felt improved in Far Cry 6, so another point there. Again, customization once again is just built upon in Far Cry 6. The gun customization is way better. You can add mods to weapons now that give boosts or certain features to a weapon. You can of course edit the ammo type, sights, barrel attachments. There's like 3 different types of suppressors that have different effects on the gun's stats and noise. It's just a more complex and detailed system from Far Cry 5, and while I still enjoy the customization from Far Cry 5, it's just a straight up improvement in Far Cry 6. Clothing customization is also quite different. Your clothes and gear actually have a gameplay effect in Far Cry 6, while in 5 it's all purely cosmetic. Clothes in Far Cry 6 can do things like give you special skills, more protection from fire, or armor piercing rounds. There's actual incentive to unlock different gear and equip the best clothes you possibly can. One thing I will give Far Cry 5 is there's more vehicle selection and customization, though not by much, and Far Cry 6's improvements to weapon and clothing customization really improved the general experience, so point to Far Cry 6. I think I'm starting to sound like a broken record here, but again, weapon selection is just improved in Far Cry 6. There's way more weapon selection. The Resolver weapons and Supremos make the gameplay way more fun. There's different types and variants of unique weapons like the minigun or CD gun or even a firework launcher. There's still some fun unique weapons in Far Cry 5 like the shovel launcher for example, but they took it to a whole other level in Far Cry 6. Both of these games have some fantastic open worlds. We have Hope County, Montana from Far Cry 5 and Yara of course from Far Cry 6. Now personally, since I'm American, I found Yara to be a way more interesting setting for Far Cry 6. I always like the more vibrant, tropical, and exotic locations for Far Cry, and while Montana is still a beautiful world, to me it doesn't quite compare to Yara. Yara is up there with some of my favorite open worlds in the Far Cry series. It's extremely immersive and colorful, there's tons of environmental variety, and there's even a capital city, which is something we've never had in a Far Cry game before, so the point is gonna go to Far Cry 6. The side quests run on a pretty similar system in both games. They usually have these brief side stories that have you shoot a couple people, save some people, etc. I think we're pretty used to Ubisoft's style of side quests by now. Really the only difference between the side quests in these two games for me is I felt Far Cry 5 side quests had more substance to them. A lot of them had really fun and colorful characters, and more importantly, they were a lot more memorable to me. I'll never forget that side quest where you send that guy to Mars to fight aliens or save Boomer from the ranch, and in Far Cry 6, a lot of the side quests felt more like fetch quests to me. Just brief little distractions, while Far Cry 5's had more story connected to them. The world activities are a different story though. Far Cry 5 and Far Cry 6 both have the standard outposts that Far Cry has had ever since like Far Cry 2 at this point, and they're still one of my favorite things to do in this game. However, Far Cry 6 introduced several new activities as well, like the anti-air sites or checkpoints that were a lot of fun to clear out as well, and actually give you some really good rewards you can use to build more Resolver weapons and upgrades. Far Cry 5 basically had a lot of those quick time events, rescue someone, blow up an enemy truck. It was still fun, but I found way more to do and explore in Far Cry 6, and I really enjoyed the new activities. Not to mention, Far Cry 6 also has the home base system with all the little mini games and stuff, so this point will go to Far Cry 6. That brings us to our final category, presentation. Far Cry 6 doesn't have a huge difference from Far Cry 5 that I think a lot of people may have expected with next gen and all, but it's still a noticeable upgrade. I also really love Far Cry 6's colors and vibrance. The game has some beautiful orange and pink sunsets, and maybe part of that is the location, but I really love the colors. But yeah, in terms of graphic fidelity, Far Cry 6 is a straight up improvement, even if it's not major, so point there for Far Cry 6. Performance is an easy one. Far Cry 5 5 runs better than 6, which is to be expected. It also doesn't have like the large city like 6 with a bunch of NPCs and buildings, so the game generally gets more frames in the open world. Soundtrack is of course based on your own personal opinion. Everyone has different preferences when it comes to soundtracks, but I've said this multiple times, but Far Cry 5 has one of my favorite soundtracks in video games, period. And I know a lot of people agree with me. The music fits so well for the theme and setting of the game. A lot of it is almost like spiced up church music to fit the religious theme. It's a beautiful soundtrack. I still enjoy Far Cry 6's soundtrack. I don't think a single Far Cry game has had a bad soundtrack, but Far Cry 6's was just a lot less memorable to me, so it was an easy point for Far Cry 5. This brings us to our final score of Far Cry 6 9 and Far Cry 5 6, leaving Far Cry 6 as the champion of this battle and the better game. Now keep in mind, I still really like Far Cry 5, and I actually prefer Far Cry 5's story over Far Cry 6's, surprisingly, but Far Cry 6 made so many great changes and improvements in the open world, and especially the gameplay that just increased that overall fun factor. Again, this was all my opinion, and let me know which game you think is better down in the comments, and how you would have scored them. I will leave a link to both my Far Cry 5 and Far Cry 6 review in the description if you want to check those out, and consider checking out some of my previous videos and subscribing for more Far Cry videos like this in the future. I think maybe we could do Far Cry 6 versus New Dawn next, so let me know if you'd like to see that, and other than that, thanks for watching, and have a great day everyone.